evening, everybody. What a change from last week. My gosh, I'm still dressed in my below zero layers. I have a learning curve that I have to go through to get ready for these 40-degree temperatures that we say we're going to have. Anyway, and also my office is about 85 degrees right now. So this will be fun. Glad to see y'all coming in this evening. We have a lot to cover as usual. So I'm going to go ahead and get started. Let's see, here we go. I have 4 layers on, but we're going to talk about robins in winter as a sign of spring or an old wives' tale. Just what does this bird mean to us? I don't know about you, but I always grew up, I grew up always being told that when you see a robin, that means spring is here. Well, as it turns out, that's not so much the case. It's funny, their scientific name, Turdus migratorius, which by the way is one of the all-time best scientific names. Turdus is actually the Latin word for thrush. These are members of the thrush family. You can see that in, not so much in the adults, I mean, the body shape resembles some of our other thrushes, but in the immature forms of the robin with the speckled breast, that speckled breast is very common in many of the thrushes that we see in North America. In fact, bluebirds too, eastern bluebirds are also part of the thrush family, and they too, as immature birds, will have that speckled breast. So a little bit of a giveaway there. But they were named migratorious because there are flocks that move around, but there are also flocks that either stay put or only move very short distances. If we look at the range map, this is from Cornell, their Lab of Ornithology website. This is the range map for the American robin. And there we are in Northern Illinois, smack dab in the middle of the year-round range for these birds. Now, some do go up farther north. So there's a chance that some of the birds that we're seeing in the wintertime aren't year-round residents. The thing that drives migration, and I think we've talked about this in the past, isn't so much the cold temperatures. And I know, like, when we think about going south for the winter, we're getting on a plane and we're going to Florida or Arizona, someplace that's warmer, because we don't like to be cold. In the case of birds, they're doing it more because of food. And bearing in mind that migration is very stressful, it's very taxing. If there's a way to get around making those great distance moves, they're going to give it a try. And in the case of robins, they are just, they found that if they don't have to move, they won't, or if they don't have to fly very far, they won't do it. We've also made things easy. Some of these plants are they're just part of our native landscape. Some of them we have introduced. A lot of yards, suburban yards, plant flowering crab trees, ornamental crab trees. And those, of course, produce little crab apples, which are then available for wintertime food for robins. Cedar waxwings love a lot of these foods too. But European buckthorn was another introduction that the fruits cling on late into the season. I think we talked about this several weeks ago. The buckthorn fruits, they actually do offer some nutrition, And they don't produce that severe intestinal reaction in birds that they do in mammals. But nonetheless, when a bird's digestive tract processes the flesh of the berry, the seed is still going to come popping out, and we're still going to end up with lots of buckthorn trees coming up that our landscape really doesn't need. The juniper, those are sometimes consumed by robins, as are hackberries, the high bush cranberry, which is, it's the Canada form of this bush is not native, but it's seen in a lot of our woodland areas, and it is commonly consumed as well. So there's all these foods here that make it unnecessary for our robins to move along. Now, I wondered how much of this was a result of recent human action, and how much has it just been part of the robin's life cycle since before Europeans moved to North America. So I did a little bit of digging around, reading some historic documents about robins and their life histories. And it seems as though they've always had this, this approach of not moving any farther than they have to. There's a great series of books. It's called The Life History of North American Birds. Now this is not pre-European history. We're only talking about maybe the last 120 years or so of bird history. But Arthur Cleveland Bent wrote for decades. He compiled these life histories of North American birds. Some of them were his observations. A lot of them were observations that were submitted by people who were maybe just watching the birds in their yard, like we do today. And in the profile of the American robin in those books, which by the way are available online on a website called Birds by Bent, B-E-N-T. People then, there were some stories of large flocks of robins migrating, particularly from the New England area down the Atlantic coast. But then there were also people writing in saying, no, we've got robins here in the winter too. So I suspect this might have been a story that was not really an old wives' tale. I think there were some parts of the country where the robins did appear to go away. But suffice it to say, if you're looking for a sign of spring, I think there's some more reliable things that we could be doing. There's this guy here, the red-winged blackbird. In fact, I saw on Illinois Birding Network that not a pair, but two males were sighted in Lake County just in the last day. So they're coming back. These are also short distance migrators. These blackbirds will form big mixed flocks. They'll be sometimes with grackles, sometimes with yellow-headed blackbirds. And again, they're going just far enough away to where they can find reliable and probably not snow-covered food. These guys eat a lot of seeds in the non-breeding season. So they're going where they, maybe a few hundred miles somewhere where the food sources are not quite so heavily buried in snow. But they're coming back, and along with them comes their behaviors of being fiercely protective of their territories. What we're seeing right now are the males. The females will follow in a few weeks, but these birds, they're a type of bird that's polygynous, which means one male will have several female mates. So it's very important to these guys that they get here before the females do. They stake out their territory, and they defend it then as we get into the nesting and the ensuing raising of the little nestlings that are to come. So look for red-winged blackbirds. They sound like they are appearing now in the Chicago suburbs. So I would put some money on these guys as being a more official sign that spring is coming. Skunk cabbage is another sign of spring that we always look for in fenny sites of areas. Fens, you know, we've talked about those. Those are a special type of wetland that have a very alkaline water source. It bubbles up through our ground aquifers. In this area, we've got our bedrock around here is dolomite or a type of limestone. So it's got a lot of minerals in it. And where that water bubbles up to the surface, that creates a nice environment for this plant that is actually got a special quality called thermogenesis, which if we break that down means it makes its own heat. The way it's able to do that is it actually starts during the growing season. So this is a picture that Julie Long, who's our steward over at Fluorescing Creek Fen here in St. Charles, she shot this picture of skunk cabbage when it's in its maybe less recognizable form. These large leaves here poking up over here on the left and here in the middle, that's skunk cabbage after it's leafed out. Now this plant is so well known for its heat generating qualities that it's sometimes more recognizable in this stage. This is what happens as we get into later February and sometimes early March. The plant takes the starch that it stored up last year through photosynthesis. It made the sugars, it stored those as starch. It brings that starch back up, converts it back into glucose, and in the presence of oxygen can start generating heat that is quite a bit warmer than the ambient temperature around it. When skunk cabbage is in bloom, which this one isn't quite, well, I guess we could say it's in bloom. This flower has what's called a spathe and spadix sort of structure. The spathe is I believe that's the outer hood part, and the spadix is inside. That has where the pollen is contained. This little structure here generally measures about 70 degrees Fahrenheit for the period of time when it is producing pollen, which is about 7 days or so. So that's enough to melt the snow around it. Now, some areas around here, I know our snow is, I know this for a fact because I actually fell in a drift yesterday. It's about 2 feet or more, 30 inches in some areas. The drifts are still pretty steep. And in those areas, the 70 degrees, it's still going to take a while to melt through. But I would say very, very soon, we're going to start seeing skunk cabbage. As we saw here, Fluorescing Creek Fen is a good spot. If you go there and you go to the little observation decks, not the one that is on the Fox River, but there are 2 smaller ones that look over what the original fen area was. There's a very, very old, you can still see the remnants of the gravel when it's not covered with snow, what we call the ice house road. That's where ice was harvested along the Fox River. That ice house trail has 2 wooden observation decks that are facing south. At the observation deck that's closer to Route 31, I guess you'd say that's the most observation deck. You can look down around the pilings and the planks of that little observation deck, and the skunk cabbage should be very soon starting to poke its way through the snow there. And another sign of spring is born. Now, this is something I don't know. I've never really seen it written in the official sign of spring books that, well, nobody's written yet, but I always notice this as we get into, say, February, the willows start to turn yellow. There's carotenoids in the twigs of willow trees, and these pigments, the thinking is they are produced before the leaves come out on the trees. When the twigs themselves are exposed to sunlight, that induces this carotenoid production. But the willows are getting really, really yellow right now. The picture on the left there, I'd taken that a couple of years ago along Campton Hills Road out near La Fox Road. But this picture on the right, I just snapped that on Sunday. That's at Elson's Hill over in DuPage County. So willows are very, very yellow right now. It's another sign that the seasons are changing, and longer days are, well, actually the longer days are already here. We've already added many, many minutes since we had our winter solstice. It's light after 5 o'clock now, which is really saying something. But so longer days are producing, result in the pigment production in the willows. You'll see these willows tend to grow where there's a little bit more moisture in the soil. It's just very, very eye-catching. Now, not every sign of spring is something that we see with our eyes. Some we actually hear with our ears. I walked out of my house yesterday and I heard the song of the song sparrow. You'll hear that? Tweet, 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 tweet. He's gonna give us another one here. So that was a very welcome sound. These guys have been at it for a couple of weeks now. I actually made some of my own recordings of northern cardinals singing. And what we're hearing right now is, that's the cardinals, birdie, 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 birdie. That's one variation of their song. The other one is this one here. What cheer, what cheer, what cheer. Cardinals can sing either one of those. Those are the songs, and those are used to declare and defend territory. They're also used as communication between mates. We're actually going to delve a little bit more into songbirds and who's doing the singing in a segment next week. Then, of course, we've been talking about robins, their presence here in the wintertime. Just because they're here doesn't mean it's springtime, but when you start to hear this, then you know the seasons are. Cheerio, 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 cheerio. I have not yet heard any robin singing. Usually the chickadees and the cardinals are about the first ones I hear. The song sparrow yesterday was really kind of a surprise. I would say also pretty soon we're going to be hearing woodpeckers drumming. They usually get going as we start to transition from late winter into early spring. So lots and lots of signs here, lots and lots more signs still to come. But spring is just around the corner. Now, we're going to switch gears a little bit and we're going to listen to another sound. I don't know how many of you are crow fans, but that sound to me, even though it's raspy and raucous and a lot of people hate it, it's one of my favorite sounds. It's the sound of crows. In this case, mobbing. Now, this was a photo that Bob and Kathy took several weeks ago of a group of crows. And there's more to the story, as we'll see in just a minute, but the sight of this many crows just kind of made me happy. In this case, they had a specific reason for gathering. It was this guy right here. There's a great horned owl. Crows, blue jays, members of the corvid family are the most famous for practicing this behavior called mobbing, but they're not the only birds that do it. There are probably I guess I'd say they're probably the best birds at it because they're loud already, and you get a few of them together and they get even louder. But I've seen smaller songbirds ganging up on bigger birds, whether it's a bird of prey like a hawk, or I've even seen birds, little birds. They looked almost like sparrows, something very small. I was one time chasing a turkey vulture. So the practice of birds ganging up on each other isn't in itself so unique, but crows, they just seem to have perfected it. They're a social bird. They will often hang out in family groups. Now, this time of year, they're in larger flocks. So many of our birds, when they're not in their breeding mode, do gather in flocks, basically for safety, but there's also other benefits of being social like that. There's more eyes to look for more food sources. There's more birds to help out with things like harassing great horned owls, even little screech owls. My dad was one time kind of upset. He was saying, what do I do about all these crows? He had a screech owl in his yard, and the crows had found it and were mobbing it as well. The screech owl finally gave up and flew away, and then the crows gave up too, and they all lived happily ever after. But mobbing is very much something that crows are known for and good at. This was a good find by Bob and Kathy to capture that in photos. But the other part that really made me happy was the fact that crows around here have really had some low points. The most dramatic drop being here in the early 2000s. If you think back about what happened locally around 2001, 2002, it was the arrival of West Nile virus. Crows, as I said, they're social birds. They tend to hang out in these large flocks. They will do when they're not breeding, they're communal roosters, meaning they roost communally. And if a bird, for some reason, corvids seem to be very susceptible to West Nile, more so than other species. A bird would bring that virus back into the roost. They'd cough, they'd sneeze. It's just like when a kid comes to school with a drippy nose. There's one day, one kid is sick, and by the end of the week, everybody's hacking and wheezing. Well, that happened with crows, but it was with a little more dramatic consequence. Many crows died back in the early 2000s due to West Nile. And their numbers really haven't, if we look back at that graph, this is all, by the way, thanks to the bird count data that Kane County Audubon keeps. Chris Mattson, thanks very much for sharing those numbers. But the numbers, I was kind of hoping we'd be back up here into, the hundreds. But just the fact that we're seeing, say, maybe a dozen crows at a time, that gives me hope that the birds are doing okay. Now, I have a friend that lives down in Champaign-Urbana. She actually saw a communal roost. She estimated about 500 birds in a communal roost down in Champaign-Urbana. So statewide, I think their numbers are fairly robust, but just knowing that these very, very, they're very, they're considered one of our most intelligent birds. When you look at the ratio of brain size to body, they're up there with parrots, which are another group of birds that are considered very intelligent. There's been lots of documented cases of crows using tools. Crows in other parts of the world will, they've been seen playing with different human artifacts. They're known, of course, for collecting shiny things that they sometimes use to attract. They might put in their nest. They might use it to attract another crow. They might just want to play around with it too. there's actually a crow that had some notoriety. Did any of you hear about Canuck? This was a crow up in East Vancouver, up in British Columbia. And it was a crow that had been raised by humans and then released into the wild. He's actually in some way a good example of why it's so important to have a professional wildlife rehabilitator take care of baby birds, because he never really lost his affinity for humans, and he hung out in a neighborhood in East Vancouver. This is a photo from one of the Facebook pages that followed his adventures. He actually stole a knife from a crime scene and was going to take it back to his humans. The police actually bribed him with a pen so he could, they swapped a shiny pen for a shiny crime scene knife. But he had all kinds of adventures around that area. There's actually a very large communal roost in East Vancouver too, where several hundred crows would hang out. And sometimes he'd go and join them, but he had a special human friend too named Sean Bergman, and they had lots of adventures together. Sean actually created a Facebook page, if you ever want to check it out, called Canuck and I. And this was a few years ago. They people of Vancouver decided to have an election of who would be the unofficial ambassador. Should it be Michael J. Fox or Canuck the Crow? Guess who won? It was Canuck. Now, this was back in, I believe, 2017. There was a documentary made. You can check it out on YouTube if you want to hear more about Canuck. It's on, it's about 18 minutes long. It's not a terribly long movie. But that's Sean underneath the umbrella. That's Canuck on top. He was marked with a zip tie. You might have seen that there on his left leg, so he would be able to be told from other crows. But then something happened. Canuck disappeared, and he was never found. This was in 2019. There had been some instances of Canuck going after mail delivery people. This whole thing with stealing shiny objects. He one time went after somebody's backpack. A bicyclist was going along and he had some reflective tape on his backpack that kind of set Canuck off. And so he may have made as many friends as he had, and his Canuck and I Facebook page does have thousands of followers, but he may have made some enemies too. In any case, Canuck has not yet been found, and he's been missing now for a few years. So the thinking is that he's probably not around anymore, but it's a neat story. If you get a chance, check out the short little documentary they made about him. It was just an interesting insight into the bonds that a bird, a highly intelligent bird like this, can form with a human being. So, you know, what would a good-natured hour be without talking about animals that glow under black light? A couple of you sent this article to me. Mike, I appreciate, I think you were the first one, Mike Tillman sent from the New York Times, the newest member of the Fluorescent Mammal Club. So I suspect there's a writer or maybe a team of editors at the New York Times that is just as captivated by this idea as, well, at least I am. I don't know if you are too. Hopefully you are, because it seems like we're going to keep talking about it. This is a little mammal in South Africa. So not in Australia where some of those other fluorescing animals live, but this is the spring hare. And it's found to glow in a patchy pink sort of. So this is interesting too, because there's kind of the scientific community is sort of split on this. Some say because it occurs across so many different orders and families and species, that it must just be a component of skin or of hair. Again, it's in this case, it's the porphyrins, which also cause the glowing in the great horned owls that we talked about a few weeks ago. But so some of the scientists are saying, it's just a quirky thing that we've latched onto, but there's really no significance to it. But there are others who are saying, it's happening in so many different animals that there must be a reason why. There must be a benefit to it, or it wouldn't have evolved to the point that it's at. Now, does it serve a purpose for intraspecies relations? Is it helpful in mate selection? Is it something that's interspecies related? Does it somehow offer camouflage, or does it aid them in some way that we just have yet to understand? They don't know. The New York Times writer did promise that this is not the end of the fluorescing mammal articles, that they are going to keep on digging, and you're going to bet that we are too, because it just seems like there's no end to the reports of these animals. And now, South Africa is not Australia, and it's not North America. It's a whole new continent of animals that glow under black light. So we're not going to leave it there. We're going to go on to entirely different. Now we're getting into animals who aren't even furry or feathery or warm-blooded. This was a little bit that just came in via email this morning. The Chicago Herp Society is actually hosting a webinar tomorrow night with the scientists who've discovered that there's amphibians that fluoresce as well. And it's not just a random frog. It's not the famous rainforest frogs that have all the crazy colors. It's biofluorescence that's widespread across all amphibians. So we're talking about the caecilians, the frogs, and the salamanders. And it can occur throughout their life history. So tadpoles, salamanders, they even said that tiger salamanders, the yellow spots on tiger salamanders, have this eerie green glow to them. This is going on, research is going on up in Minnesota at St. Cloud State University. And their thinking too is that it's not just random. These marks aren't just throwing back part of the light spectrum, that there is definitely a reason for it. They're not sure either. They think that there might be some help with mate attraction as well with frogs, especially because some of our frogs, most of our frog species are kind of nocturnal during the breeding season. That's when the males are best able to call. There's a lot of humidity in the air, so it's easier to move around at night as well. But there is this talk tomorrow night. I can send you this link if you're interested in listening. You can also look up, Dr. Lamb has a website, and on that website, there's a TED Talk that she did about her work with amphibian fluorescence. So I tell you, it just keeps going. I'm about to put new batteries. I've almost worn out. My black light is glowing kind of dimly these days, but I keep looking, and we're going to keep finding stuff. So stay tuned on that. Now, Laura McKinsey, I know you had wondered a few weeks ago about gray foxes in Illinois. And I said I would see what I could find out. I sent an email to Bill Grazer. He's the wildlife biologist for Kane County. Because when I moved into this field in 1999, I remember then that there was, as I was learning about the different mammals of Kane County, there were these anecdotal reports that there were gray foxes, but in the western part of the county, or in areas that were not very densely populated. But I never saw one, and I never talked to anyone who saw one. There was one day I got a call that there was a dead one by the side of the road near Delnor Hospital. So actually in a very heavily populated area. Jumped in the nature mobile and I went driving over there, and I didn't see anything. So either there was a gray fox and somebody picked it up right away, or it was just, something else, some other mammal that somebody else picked up. But there was no roadkill by the time I got there. So that was unconfirmed. I kind of suspect that was not a gray fox because that's just such a busy, that Caneville, Kesslinger, and Randall intersection there is just so busy. Doesn't seem like a likely spot. Now there are areas where gray foxes will kind of cohabitate with people. Not in this part of the state, but in other parts of the state. I want to, though, kind of give you an idea of what to look for just in the off chance that one should pop up. The gray fox is often referred to as the cat fox because it has some cat-like qualities. It has claws that it can push in and out. So unlike our dog foot paws that have claws that are out all the time, these guys can somewhat pull theirs in and out. And they also climb trees. In fact, they will, I don't know if it's often, but at least some of the time, they will actually den in a hollow tree and have their young in a hollow tree. Because they can climb up and get out of the way that way. They've got a neat name. So you might remember when we talked about red foxes, their scientific name is Vulpes vulpes, and Vulpes is Latin for fox, so they're the fox's fox. Urosiren cinerio argenteus is the name of the gray fox. It's a mouthful. It means the dog with the tail that's ash colored and silvery. So their fur is not really as luxurious as we tend to think of the red fox coat being. It's a little bit coarser. It does grow out in the wintertime. They do get a thicker coat. What we're looking at in this picture is a summer coat, but it's just a more, I don't know if you'd call it a more grizzled look, but they also have at the tip of their tail a black, their tail ends in black. The red fox, as we talked about before, their tail, as long as they don't lose the tip of it, which isn't always a guarantee, sometimes stuff happens, but a red fox has white on the end of the tail and a gray fox will have black. To give you an idea of size and shape, the gray fox is a little bit leggier than the red fox and might weigh a couple of pounds less. They have a little bit leaner outline to them. Both the red fox and the gray fox are smaller than coyotes, and that's an important factor that we'll get to in just a second. Now, I remember reading quite a bit about gray foxes in the early 2000s, thanks to this article. It was just a quick little thing. This used to be a wonderful, it was a wonderful magazine. It's no longer in publication. It's called Chicago Wilderness. And in the winter of 2005, they profiled this little grouping of gray foxes that lived in a cemetery. This was Oak Woods Cemetery on the south side of Chicago. And there were, at that time, as many as 15 gray foxes in the cemetery. They aren't there anymore. And the thinking at the time was this habitat of open woods, which is what the gray fox prefers. They're a little bit more woodland oriented as opposed to our red foxes, which will oftentimes hunt in fields. The gray fox doesn't like to stray too far from a wooded habitat. But things changed as the coyote population continued to grow. The gray fox population at the Oakwood Cemetery didn't just drop, it went down to nothing. So there's been some investigation into what's going on with gray foxes. They are listed as a species in greatest need of conservation. I wasn't able to find an exact number, and plus, the number of an animal, it's a hard concept to grasp. So, if we say there's 500 gray foxes statewide, what does that tell us? Are they all in one spot? Or are they spread around? I wasn't able to find a census number like that, but I did find that the trend in their numbers is downward, and it's not just in Illinois. It's in Illinois, in Iowa, and Indiana, and Missouri. All of the states surrounding us as well are seeing downturns in their numbers. And the thinking is that it's not just one thing. It's not just the coyotes. There's been a lot of change in habitat as trees are cut down. New ones might be planted in their place, but it's going to take a long time for those woods to mature. Changes in farming practices too have created fewer hiding places for these foxes. It's the way that the farmland has fragmented the woods where these animals hang out. It's just kind of cut back on places that they are able to survive in. Now, one thing, there were actually two things that jumped out at me as some of the research I was reading. One was that the gray fox is considered the feistier of the two fox species that we have. So whereas a red fox, and by the way, coyotes will kill a red fox or a gray fox just to kill them. They don't kill them and eat them. They just kill them to get rid of them. A red fox will try to get away. They won't pick a fight, shall we say. But a gray fox will if a coyote approaches them, they won't back down, and they'll go back. They were described as being feisty in that respect. And because they're so much smaller than the coyote, they oftentimes don't come out ahead in those sort of interactions. Now, also because we have so many coyotes, it's usually not one-on-one anymore. It's maybe two coyotes on one fox. And in that case, the gray fox doesn't stand a chance. So that different approach to a conflict may be affecting their lower survivability. Red fox runs away, gray fox stands its ground, gray fox loses. The other thing, and I thought this was interesting too, this actually made me think of my grandparents' farm and many of the farms around them. My grandma used to make grape jelly every year. She had a grape arbor at the back of their, where their farmhouse was. And there was a nice wooded area with the grape arbor out on the sunny side of the woods. As he said, many of their neighbors had the same. Gray foxes love grapes. And I don't know. I know we've got some vineyards that are popping up, and some of them are starting to grow some of their own grapes. But a lot of people call Concord grapes fox grapes because of the way the foxes would come and feed almost exclusively on them when those fruits were ripe and ready. So there's a little bit of a connection too, and fewer numbers of people growing grapes in their yard, and a possible loss of a food source for this increasingly rare mammal. So as I mentioned before, Bill Grazer says in the time that he's been the wildlife biologist here in Kane County, there's been no sightings, no reports, no evidence of gray foxes here. He had some friends that worked at Max McGraw Wildlife up in Elgin, and they actually went down to try and find those foxes in the cemetery. And they also looked at a cemetery in Skokie that was reported to have gray foxes, and they didn't find any there either. Now, heading a little bit farther west into DeKalb County, I got in touch with my friend Peggy Doty, who works for the Extension Service in the Forest Preserve District in DeKalb County. She said that a few years back, she did see unfortunately, it was a dead gray fox pup in Genoa, out in DeKalb County. And then a few years back, there were some gray fox pups that were released in a DeKalb County Forest Preserve that had been cared for by a wildlife rehabilitator. She hasn't seen them since, so she doesn't know if they survived either. So there's at least been a couple of sightings in DeKalb County. Whether there's any existing population there, I don't know. But their numbers are declining, and it's not just an Illinois thing, but it gives us something else to keep an eye out for. So especially if you're traveling towards Western Illinois, which seems to be where they're hanging on the best, keep an eye out for this cat-like fox. So, the snow angel thing. This is another story. This is from Diane Chesko. This was a little incident that happened in her yard over the weekend. So there's our snow angel. And I'm just going to quick show this next one because it's one of those, sensitive viewers, avert your eyes sort of picture. Oh, wait, where did it go? Can't find it. Well, this is the remains. Maybe I cleaned it up. There was a hawk that came down into Diane's yard, and we know it's a hawk because of the feathers that were left behind. When a hawk comes down, let's back up for a second. When an owl comes down and takes some prey, they'll usually fly off with it. They don't usually pluck it. They'll just kind of take it and swallow it. With a canine or a feline, again, they'll usually carry it off. There might be a few feathers, but when you see a big pile of feathers like this, you can tell that it's the work of a hawk. Now, what its meal was, I was kind of thinking, given the size of the bird, which I've covered up with this picture, that it was a mourning dove, but I'm not so sure now looking at the markings on some of these feathers here. What also struck me of this, I guess we could call it a kill site, was the amount of tamped down snow around it. There was quite a bit of pacing around and plucking that occurred before the actual meal was consumed. But there's a lot of stories like this in the snow. I was at Homestead today giving a presentation, and people there were talking about going out and looking for snow angels on the property there and finding piles of feathers like this. So I would say our Cooper's hawks are probably the main suspects in a case like this, but we do occasionally see sharpshins and merlins this time of year. Suffice it to say, there was a hawk that had a very good meal in Diane's yard. Now, I'm going to throw this out there. It's still a few weeks off, and we need to get our website updated, and we need to get these free programs in. But the entire month of April, because you guys have been so loyal and so faithful to sign up every week, in honor of Earth Day, Good Natured is going to be free throughout the month of April. The thing is, you'll still need to register, and what we're going to try and do is capture all the email addresses, not so that we can fill your inboxes with all kinds of Park District propaganda, but we would like to try and grow the audience. So if once we get this up and running, I'll send you guys a link, and if you could share it with one person, and we could get a slightly larger audience tuning in, we can maybe make this a full-time free thing. That's the goal. I know that's what we set out to do back when we started doing these in June. And it's still taking, I think we're up to maybe 20 people each week. If we can get just a few more people signing up, our sponsorship person can take that out and get some, either a sponsor or sell some ads. You might have to listen to a little commercial, but it's something that we're going to give a try to around the celebrations of Earth Day. So keep that in mind. I'll be sending that link out in the next couple of weeks. And with that, we're going to take a look at what's coming up next week. It's the talking about signs of spring. The ducks are on the move. Redhead ducks. It's been a couple sighted in this area. They're a duck that winters a little bit south of here, and they breed quite a bit north of here, up in the northern Great Plains. So they're a neat species to look for out on the river. We're going to profile them. We're going to take a look at some interesting articles that have come out about bias in songbird research, and who's actually doing the singing out there. I came across, I forget what I was looking up, but I came across madstones, and it reminded me of the term bezoar, which was something I learned way back when. These are stones that form in the digestive tracts of ungulates or ruminants, like, let's call it what they are, deer. And there's some phenomenal stories about the magical healing properties of madstones. Of course, we'll get some more reader emails, and who knows what's going to come across the old Good Nature desk in the coming week. So with that, I'm going to end the share and turn it over to you guys. Chris, that is quite a handsome profile picture you've changed to there. Does anybody have any questions or stories? If not,
Hi, Pam.
Oh, hey, Laura.
Hey, I was just thinking of the skunk cabbage, and a phenomenal place to go and see hundreds and hundreds of them. It is at Trout Park in Elgin.
Yes.
That is
great suggestion, Laura.
Yeah, it's an unusual little spot. But yeah, if you start at the bottom, you'll, oh my, just hundreds, and it's gorgeous, just gorgeous.
Thanks. Yeah, and Trout Park, you know, there's a wetland complex there that unfortunately got bisected by Interstate 90 when they put the tollway in. But Trout Park is kind of at the south end of those wetlands. If you go north of 90, there's, and I don't know that it's open to the public yet, but Forested Fen Forest Preserve is on the north side of the interstate. And just the remnants are still there. I can only imagine what it was like, you know, a couple hundred years ago, but Trout Park is known for some of those unusual the plants that like that or need that fen-like sort of environment. Now that we're talking about it, Glenwood Park and Red Oak Nature Center, those are also, Glenwood is at the south end of Batavia, a little bit south of Funway, and then of course Red Oak would be a little bit south of there. That too is part of a remnant fen complex. I always forget about the skunk cabbage at Glenwood because I don't tend to see it. There's no trail that makes it easy to see. I always see it in the summertime when those big leaves have come up. but at Glenwood, it would be kind of at the corner of the entrance drive, and it would be the southeast corner of the entrance drive and the bike trail. It's very low lying and wet there. There's some trees that have come in. And then at Red Oak, as you go through Lippold Park, which is the old archery range, that north end of Red Oak's trails. We talked about where the milk house, the milk cooling area, what was that, where they used to put the milk containers, that was what, 2 months ago we talked about that. There's some old a concrete well that still remains from where the dairy farm that was there used to cool their milk. That area has a lot of skunk cabbage too. Neat stuff to see, and the snow only needs to melt a little bit more, and we'll be able to see those flowers popping up. Anybody else?
Don't forget to send the link for that program tomorrow night.
Okay, the fluorescing amphibians.
Yes, yeah, I forgot already, so.
All right, you know what, I'll shoot that out to everybody in case you want to check it out. It's a free Zoom program offered through the Chicago Herp Society. In fact, I'll also include the link to that scientist, her lab website, and then on there's also a link to her TED Talk. So if you can't make the webinar tomorrow night, but you want to hear more about glowing animals, because who doesn't, you can check that out in the email. Thanks, Chris.
Yeah, I'd really like to see it, so.
Yeah. Well, I tried with what's left of my black light. I tried on the dried salamander that I have, and it didn't work on there, but that one was so young, it didn't even have any spots. And what they're saying is that it's the yellow spots on the tiger salamander that glow. So, and I'm also anxious as we get into, so frog season will be starting up now in a couple of weeks. The chorus frogs and the spring peepers are going to be calling pretty soon. Tadpoles are usually starting to show up by April. I want to take the black light out into a wetland at night and see what we can see there too. So no end of the fun. Just need to get new batteries. Anyway, everybody, so much appreciate you tuning in this evening. I'll look forward to seeing everybody back again next week.
Thanks, Pam. It was great.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thanks. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Good night.
Thanks,
Thank you, Pam.
See you soon.
Thanks, Pam.